Hello, everyone. It's me, the Grouchy Historian, back for week 4 of the second quarter of our Constitution course. Okay, let's get going. Okay, so as we discussed last week, as they signed the Constitution, all right, not all of the founders considered it to be a perfect document. They considered it to be the best document that they could get, right? However, there's still more because it was still not a done deal, right? As we mentioned last week, they sort of snuck in at the very end that the Constitution would be ratified not by the state legislatures, which they considered politically risky, but by special ratifying conventions that each of the states would call, keeping in mind they needed 9 out of the 13 to ratify it to make it the law of the land. Okay, but it was still not a done deal. There was still a significant amount of argument, debate, discussion, whatever you want to call it, over whether the state should sign this new Constitution, right? So what do we do in this situation? We go get a PR firm. Well, sort of. Back then they called it writing letters that would be published in newspapers. Back in the day when newspapers were newspapers, that's another topic. Anyway, so to support ratification, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay wrote what became to be known as the Federalist Papers, 85 letters that were written on various topics about the Constitution to help persuade the colonists, the citizens of the new United States, to persuade the citizens, to persuade the ratifying conventions to ratify the Constitution. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to read a number of these that are in your book, because the ones that I picked, did a little research on the internet and found the Federalist Papers that are most often cited in Supreme Court cases. Yes, when the justices on the Supreme Court are working to decide what was the founder's intent in a particular article of the Constitution, or as we will see in a couple of weeks, a particular part of the Bill of Rights, what was their intent, they often go back to the Federalist Papers. So what we're going to look at are the Federalist Papers that are most often cited or used as references in Supreme Court cases, okay? Now, keeping in mind, there were also, not surprisingly, a series of anti-Federalist papers written as well. Most people we'll just go with don't know that these exist because they're not talked about much, because of course the Federalists won. The Constitution was ratified and we have a Constitution. However, if you have a serious interest, they are worth reading because they bring up a lot of interesting points. The Anti-Federalists, again, written by various founding fathers, we're not really as sure who wrote them as we do the Federalists, although we think Patrick Henry may have written some of them. They express some genuine concerns that shockingly might have come to pass over the past 200 years of giving a federal government an excessive amount of power over the states. We'll look at one of those, but of course, they were sort of written in a back and forth. So there were often Federalist Papers written in response to Anti-Federalist Papers and Anti-Federalist Papers written in response to Federalist Papers. So it's kind of interesting to look at them side by side. They're not a perfect matchup for each other. I'm sure that some historian has taken the time to figure out which one was written in response to which one and all that. But we will look at one of them, because in the end, the Anti-Federalists did have their day in court, so to speak, because one of the things that they did bring up as a big issue, which was immediately seized upon by the citizens, and the founders are like, oh, yeah, we probably should have done that, is the Bill of Rights. There's a definite lineage to the big objections that the Anti-Federalists put to the fact that there was not a specified Bill of Rights for American citizens in the Constitution, and the fact that what came to be passed in some of the later constitutional conventions was basically a double secret deal that as soon as they ratified the Constitution, they would immediately put forth what became the 10 Bill of Rights as the first 10 amendments, because of course, being very smart, the Federalists had written a way to amend the Constitution into the Constitution, okay? Now, funny thing, they were written, this is kind of how the founders did politics, right? Which is why they pretty much eat our current politicians for lunch without even breaking a sweat, just saying. They were written anonymously, but everybody pretty much knew who wrote them, right? They were very good at sort of putting the word out there. Everybody knew who it was. Most importantly, everybody knew that George Washington was behind it, right? He was the key player in getting this done. And they were very well written. Again, each of them reads kind of like a legal brief, certainly like an extremely well thought out legal argument in favor of the Constitution. Now, in your syllabus, okay, I'm going to put a few bullet points for each of them, but don't skip reading them. You need to read them all, okay, because they all fit together. And if you pick through them, there are some genuine nuggets of political quotes here that I love. I will share one with you because it just spoke to me. In Federalist 51, it said, quote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and then in the next place, oblige it to control itself." Boom, mic drop, okay? We're gonna have a couple of these quotes as we go through here, and believe me, you're gonna sit there and go, doggone, those guys were pretty smart, and they were. You'll also find a table in here. I got this from Wikipedia. Yeah, don't get used to it. If I haven't said it before, I'm not a genuine fan of Wikipedia per se. It is a useful reference. I would never, ever, 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 ever allow my student to use Wikipedia as a source. Bad. But again, the one thing I do like about Wikipedia is that for a well-written Wikipedia article, it's well sourced at the end. So what I use Wikipedia for myself is I go straight to the end. I look at all those sources and I start picking through the sources to see which of those I trust and can use. But they did have this super cool table, which I put in here for the Anti-Federalist and Federalist Papers, because it kind of shows how they go back and forth on particular topics. And if you look at the topics there under subject, they argued about pretty much everything that shockingly is still relevant to us today as Americans. The Bill of Rights, taxation, taxing powers, the judiciary, executive powers, regulating elections, who'd have thunk, representation in the House of Republicans and the Senate, right? It's all right here. And you can see how they go back and forth, right? So if you want to kind of look and compare the Federalist Papers we're reading, if you wanted to look up their corresponding Anti-Federalist paper, boom, here you go. So the first ones we're looking at this week here in week 4. Okay, we start with Federalist 1, right? Because that sort of sets the table for everything else. Alexander Hamilton, of course, wrote Federalist 1, and he starts off with saying why he's writing them, what the purpose of this is, and he dives right into it of why he's going to explain to the masses why the Constitution is important and they should ratify it. Then we're going to go through Federalist 10, also one cited a lot in Supreme Court cases, right? This is where we discuss, in particular, why we have a constitutional republic and not a democracy. I know people continue to this day, 2021, keep saying, well, we're a democracy. We should be a better democracy. No, we are a constitutional republic. Okay. Federalist 51 talks about checks and balances between the government, something that, as most of us have seen who pay attention these days, totally out of whack today, none at all. Federalist 70, again, talks about the executive department, right? This was a big issue. There was a lot of concern that the president would try to become a king. Let me think about that for a second. An executive, a monarch, ruling by fiat. Let me think about that for a second. Anyway, and then of course they immediately started also talking about the judiciary, because it was very important to the founders that the judiciary have independence from the other two branches of government. We're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. So as you go through this week, okay, read the Federalist Papers, got some sort of discussion questions here, some points to ponder, okay, and of course, the weekly paper topic this week, I picked out because it's kind of try to make it a little more fun by taking you back in time, right? This is something that Colby did in their curriculum, which I thought was an excellent teaching tool. So this week in week 4, you're going to assume the mantle of a American citizen circa 1787, and you're trying to persuade or not some of your fellow tavern sitters about a particular talking point that you picked up out of the Federalist Papers about why we should or should not have this Constitution. I'm sure your instructors are looking forward to reading your papers. Anyway, that's it for week 4. We will finish up the Federalist Papers next week.